Welcome to the Develop Yourself podcast, where we teach you everything you need to land your first job as a developer by developing your skills, your mindset, your network, your habits, and more. Today, I speak with Jake Gaba. Jake is a student at Stanford's Graduate School of Business and the owner of Indifferent Broccoli, a video game server hosting and rental company that he bought while he was taking a year's leave of absence from Stanford. In this episode, Jake and I talk about how he narrowed down his criteria for acquiring a business, the fateful Google search that led him to his first acquisition, his unique process for interviewing interns, what playing video games can teach us about business, and much more. This is a great interview, and I really enjoyed speaking with Jake, and I know that you'll enjoy this as well. So without further ado, here is my interview with Jake Gaba. Jake, welcome to the Develop Yourself podcast.
Peter, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time. I'm wondering if you might be able to just introduce yourself and say a little bit about who you are and what you do for those of our audience who might not be familiar with you.
Sounds good. My name is Jake Gaba, and I run a video game server hosting business called Indifferent Broccoli. And I'm running that at the same time that I'm enrolled in business school. I'm getting my MBA at Stanford.
Yeah, super interesting. So there's a lot of different reasons I wanted to talk to you. And I initially became familiar with you through a YouTube video on a channel that I subscribe to. So we'll get into that, I'm sure. But super interesting. I think probably one of the biggest things I want our audience to take away is that you don't necessarily have to get a job. You can buy a job, or you can create your own job, and you've done that. So I just think that's fascinating. So I guess I maybe spoiled that a little bit, but if you could maybe tell a little bit of the backstory, how did you end up running Indifferent Broccoli in the first place? That would be maybe helpful context for the audience.
Mm-hmm. So I started business school fall 2020, completed the first quarter, but for a variety of reasons, one of the top ones being business school during COVID is not the ideal experience. I decided to take a leave of absence. So I decided to take a gap year from Stanford. And so that gap year was going to be all of 2021. So from the end of the first quarter to January of 2021, I was just brainstorming ideas of what to work on over this one free year. And I knew I wanted to do something entrepreneurial. I knew I didn't want to recruit for a job. I wanted to do my own project. So I spent 6 weeks just brainstorming ideas. What are projects I could work on? And my one constraint was it had to be related to video games. So I brainstormed, do I want to spend the year streaming on Twitch and try and become famous on Twitch? Do I want to make my own game? Do I want to make plugins for Unity? Had a long list. And one of the ideas on the list was, well, do I really need to start from scratch, or could I buy a business? So to explore that idea, I Googled video game SaaS company for sale. And on the second or third page of Google, I stumbled on this website called AliDigitalBroker.com. It's run by this guy, Ali, who's a boutique M&A advisor based out of Canada. And on his site, he had only maybe 6 or 7 businesses listed, one of which was this video game server hosting business. I requested more information, got on the phone with Will Kwan, who you mentioned. He and I clicked. We're about the same age, and we have similar ways of thinking. So trust was built very, very early on, and pretty much all the stars aligned. He was ready to sell the business. I was looking to take over a business for the year. So transaction went through. I took over. It was called 7D2D server hosting at the time, and then spent the entire year building out this server hosting business.
Yeah, super interesting. So there's so many things we could talk about, but just the fact that your initial search turned up the opportunity that you ended up taking is pretty awesome, I think. Coming from someone who's kind of scared to do something like this, but also has not quite found the right thing. I think I'm a little envious of that search working out the way it did. I'm curious, why a SaaS company? So you mentioned there's a lot of different things you could do.
Mm-hmm.
You settled on buying a business, but it didn't necessarily have to be a SaaS, right? So I'm curious, why did you settle on a SaaS to buy?
So I have software engineering background. I studied computer science and digital art at Dartmouth and did all my internships in software engineering. So I worked at a startup one summer, worked in Microsoft one summer. And so background in CS. But after graduating, I did nothing related to computer science. I actually went more down a marketing route. So worked in advertising, joined a startup to lead marketing, but nothing related to software engineering. So part of my thinking of like going back to business school was I want to get back more into something techy. Like nothing is better than building things that once they're automated, you can step back and you don't need to worry about it anymore.
Yeah.
So yeah, software is the most efficient, best way to build something if you want to have automated income.
Right. And was the thinking as well, maybe like you do it for a year, go back to business school, but wouldn't necessarily stop doing it? Software, as you mentioned, is a way to automate a lot of things. So maybe it would free up capacity for you to do school and run this business at the same time. Is that part of the thinking?
Yeah. So thinking in terms of a business owner or manager, there's really not that much difference between managing people and coding. Like at its root, you're just trying to accomplish a task where you're not doing it. And you can either have
Right.
humans do it or you can have code do it. And obviously the tactics and the skills of getting people to do things versus getting computers to do things, those are different skill sets. But at its core, you're trying to do the same thing. And I've just found, me specifically, I am better at getting computers to do things than people.
Yeah, I think computers are a lot more obedient, right? As long as you give them the right instructions. So, yeah, it's a good point. So, Naval Ravikant has this concept, leverage. There's labor leverage, which is the first thing you described, and then also code or media leverage. So, yeah, just different forms of trying to multiply yourself in a way. So that's a great point. So I'm curious if you could take us through kind of what happened after you acquired the business. So you're now, a year and a half in. It's a completely different brand. You've expanded beyond 72D. For the audience that doesn't game, and I don't game, that's 7 Days to Die. So this is, maybe you could say a little bit about like what you actually get from your service and who are the kinds of people who would be using Indifferent Broccoli in the first place.
Yes. So there's this niche of games that are mostly the genre that Minecraft is in. They're called survival crafting games. And for whatever reason, there's a quirk of these games where this third-party ecosystem of server hosts has emerged. So if you want to play Minecraft multiplayer on your own private world, you don't do that through Minecraft. You go to these third-party server hosts, you rent a server, you push launch my server, and then you get an IP address back and a dashboard to manage the server. And then that's how you play. And then you put that back into Minecraft, and that's how you play multiplayer Minecraft. And there's a long tail of these games. There's a game called Valheim, which is like Viking Minecraft. There's 7 Days to Die, which is like zombie Minecraft. But there's this whole niche of these survival crafting games where if you want to play on your own private world with your friends, you need to rent a server from one of these niche game server providers. And you could go through AWS, but AWS is expensive, and you could host it on your own computer, but there are reasons you wouldn't want to do that. So you go to these niche providers.
Got it. So that makes sense to me at a high level. So you started out with 7 Days to Die. Was the plan always to expand, with that being the low-hanging fruit for these other games, or did that kind of happen over time as you were just trying to figure out what the best move was?
The plan was always to expand. I didn't have a timeline. I didn't know how things would unfold, but I knew I had a full year to work on this full time before going back to school. So I did want to expand. And I did get lucky in that about a month after I acquired the business, had a little bit of time to get up to speed on everything. This new game, Valheim, came out. And it was a rocket ship game. I think one of the fastest selling games ever through Steam. And it needed server hosting. So I did almost just copy paste the 7 Days to Die code and landing page and website to a new website called Viking Server Hosting, and ran 72D server hosting and Viking server hosting at the same time. Grew a lot just in those initial couple months because I got lucky, and then I realized, wow, if I want to grow, I need to support more games, and I need to keep my eyes out for new games that come out. But I don't want to keep making these random generic websites for each new game. So that's when I centralized the brand to Indifferent Broccoli. And Indifferent Broccoli, I can explain that later, where that came from later. But that's what I ended up with. And from there have just iteratively improved the website, improved the server dashboard, and added more games.
Got it. Yeah, that's great. And what are the games that you're supporting now?
So now support Minecraft, Valheim, 7 Days to Die, Terraria, Ark, Rust, Satisfactory, Project Zomboid, and V Rising. And there may be one I'm missing, but those are the main ones. And I've got plans to add more games as well.
Yeah, so that's a significant expansion from one game to sound like 8 or so. So that's super interesting. Did that take kind of your whole year to do, or have you continued to add I assume you're back in business school at this point?
So this summer, I did a summer internship, completely unrelated. So focused mostly on that. Since I've come back to business school, which I returned to school in January of this year, I've been spending about 5 to 10 hours a day, more on maintenance, just keeping things going. So I have a small team of customer support people who respond to issues that pop up. And most of the interaction with customers is through Discord. So people come to Discord, post an issue they have. The first line of defense is the customer support team, and then anything they can't handle, they'll pass to me. And then if there's an issue that pops up a lot, then I'll fix it. If it's a bug or if it's something that just needs to be automated. But I haven't worked full time on growing the business since last year.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So 5 to 10 hours a week. The rest is other things, school. And so is it mostly, we were talking about automation. So you mentioned you have customer support people, but is the actual product side kind of running itself at this point?
Yeah. So the flow from the user's perspective is, okay, I want a Valheim server. So I go to, well, maybe I'll Google best Valheim server hosting, and then maybe Indifferent Broccoli will show up in a result, or you'll go to a review site, and Indifferent Broccoli will be on that review site. You say, oh, that looks interesting. So go to Indifferent, I click through, and then you land on my website. You click launch my server, and then in a couple minutes, a server is automatically spun up in the background. That's totally automated. It's allocated to the proper region. There's load balancing on the back end to make sure that no machine is overused. And then after a couple minutes, you get an email saying your server setup is complete. Here's your IP address. Here's your port. You can configure any settings on the Indifferent Broccoli dashboard. And then that's it. And all that, all of that, and then changing settings, all of that is automated. The reason an issue might pop up is maybe you need help configuring settings. Some of the games are more complicated than others to actually configure, or maybe you need help setting up mods. So you post in the help channel. And over time, like I've tried to solve those problems initially by just improving the dashboard or making clearer instructions, but you can't catch every edge case right away. So that's when people would come and ask for help.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And obviously an engineer's dream, I think, to have a business that is mostly automated and running on code. So congrats on that. That's really exciting, I think. I read something in your starter story interview. So for the audience, I'll link this below, but this is the other source of information I use to get some background. But you mentioned the process that you use to hire your customer support interns. So I'm wondering if you might be able to talk about that a little bit. I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, so that was iteration one of the customer support. I now have a second team of customer support, which I can talk about both of these. So the first was a team of interns. So I wanted to just, one, see if interns would help me go faster. Two, practice managing a team. Three, running a business by yourself is kind of lonely, so I just wanted to have people around. And so the way I recruited these interns is I recruited students, posted on a job board called Handshake, which is primarily a job board for students. Got a bunch of applications. And then the interview process was, I had them all join a game of Valheim, and then they had to beat the boss together. And then from me watching them play together to beat the first boss in Valheim, that's how I decided who to take to the next round, which was a more practical interview after that. But it was a great way to see people's personality, see who spoke a lot, see who sort of followed everyone, who was the person that jumped ahead and was like, okay, you need to go cut down the trees. I'll go look for the boss. You need to go collect the deer trophies. And you could really see the different personalities and who took the process seriously. And it was just fun for them. Like most of them told me after that they had a great experience. They'd never been in an interview like that before where they're playing a video game. So overall, that was a good experience for me and the interns. And now looking back, was it a better way of evaluating than anything else? Maybe. I don't think it was worse, but it was definitely more fun for everybody and got people more excited. So that was the first round of interns. They were just there for the summer for a few months. I now have a longer term customer support team. And this team I recruited from my customers. So I sent a message out into Discord to everybody saying, hey, you all know this just as well as anybody because you use Indifferent Broccoli, you play these games. I'm looking for people to help with customer support. So send me a message if you're interested and why you're interested. And from there, I recruited directly from my customers.
Yeah, that's super interesting on both counts, I think. Have you noticed any difference with the team that came from existing customers, given their knowledge of the product?
Yeah. So on the first go around with the student interns, um, their mindset's different because they know they're just there for a couple months, and they're doing it more with the mindset of, oh, I can have an internship for my resume, I can learn something this summer. And it was only part-time, so a few of them had other full-time internships, but it's still like, oh, this is temporary. For recruiting from my customers for this actual potentially longer term arrangement, it seems like I got more professionals, like people that actually want to do good work, want to prove themselves, want to get paid to hang out on Discord. To just got more serious people when it's not framed as a student internship.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. Well, I might have to take the video game thing if I ever hire anybody because, yeah, like you said, more fun. Fun can't hurt, in my opinion. And also, it is occurring to me that playing a video game, especially something like Valheim, is such a dynamic situation that I think it's hard to hide who you are because you don't have enough time to think. I think like in a normal interview, you kind of know what's coming and you can kind of do what's expected and put your best foot forward. But in a situation that's changing so quickly, I think your true self probably comes out a little bit more.
Agreed.
Awesome. So I'm trying to figure out maybe where we want to go next. I'm curious if you might want to say a little bit about how you came up with the name Indifferent Broccoli. So you mentioned it sounded like a lot of thought behind the brand and all that kind of thing. What was that process like?
In high school, my friends and I were the people who are now my customers. Like we played a lot of video games. We even had our own Minecraft server. And we had our own sort of kooky club called the Lumberjack Club. And we would make these cartoons of the indifferent lumberjack. And there was the indifferent lumberjack and the indifferent lion and the indifferent broccoli. And I just had this whole universe of these indifferent characters. And so that, just from a personal perspective, like I know what my potential customers find funny. So reviving that from my high school days, and then applying that to this now business that I have total ownership over, so I can do things that are personally meaningful for me. I don't need to hire a random branding agency to come up with a name. I can draw from my own background that I find interesting. Makes the whole thing more personal and meaningful. Like this business is an extension of me. It's got jokes from my high school days. It's a sustainable business. It's related to video games, which I like. So it's really an extension of me, which is a good way to go about doing the whole solopreneur route, as opposed to you're doing a VC-backed company going for $1 billion. You got to do everything the optimal way and spend a lot of money on the right way to brand something, and that's not for me. I like this more personal route.
Yeah, I think that's super cool. And yeah, the idea that like a business is an extension of yourself, I agree with, especially something like this. But also like a business is a means for trying to make the world a little bit more the way you think it should be, or an expression of your personality, I think are all really interesting avenues that a business could take, especially a solopreneur business like you mentioned. Kind of just out of my curiosity, this is maybe a little bit too nitty gritty for our audience, but I'm curious, like once you had the name, like how'd you get the actual logo? Did you just do like a 99 Designs kind of deal, or what was that process like?
So the logo came from my friends and I doing our silly designs. So I came up with an adaptation of our high school designs. I made the Indifferent Broccoli logo, and I actually made it in Google Slides. So that was another like quirky bit of everything is all of the designs. You can see some of the icons on the website of like a Viking and a dinosaur and then the broccoli. All of those are made in Google Slides with simple shapes. So I made those.
That's fascinating. So yeah, I guess I forgot you mentioned your background is also in digital art. So it makes sense that you could do the logo. So you're just dragging the shapes and kind of putting them together on Google Slides in such a way that eventually they kind of resemble what you want.
Exactly. It's just circles and curves and squares, and it's exported as a PNG with a transparent background on Google Slides.
That's great. I'm going to keep that one in the back pocket, I think, for
Yeah.
next time I need custom illustrations or logos.
It's not the most sophisticated, but you got to do just what works. That's something I've thought a lot about through this process is like you don't even want to pigeonhole yourself as a software engineer or as a designer or as a whatever. You just have something that you want to make and then you do it. Whatever it takes to make it. Like I just need a logo, so I use the tools I have and I make a logo. I need this website to exist. Maybe I'll code it. Maybe I'll like bring in tools from whatever, or I'll hire someone. I just need to get it done. That's a better mindset for making anything. Just forget your hammer, because then everything looks like a nail, that whole thing. It's just, I want this thing to exist and I'll do whatever it needs to be done to make this thing exist.
Yeah, I very much agree. And Aaron, my co-host, and I, we work with a lot of people who want to become software engineers, but the downside of having that as the goal is that often it looks like learn HTML, learn CSS, learn JavaScript, and that's super boring, right? Like, because then it's like you're learning syntax, but it's like, why are you learning this syntax? Whereas the people who start with a project in mind, we found are super motivated because you're learning things, but you're not learning them just to check a box or for their own sake, but you're learning in order to be able to create something that you want to exist in the world, which I find is much more powerful motivation than let me check this box. I find it really hard to motivate to do arbitrary stuff like that. So I think that's a great insight that I wanted to highlight for everyone.
100%.
So I'm curious now, so you're in business school again, you're still running Indifferent Broccoli. What's kind of the long-term plan? Is this always going to be something that you just do on the side, or do you want it to maybe be what you do after school? Like, what's the thinking around that?
So I use this summer to help me answer that question. I know I want to run my own business. And the question that I was exploring this summer was, is Indifferent Broccoli that business I want to run? I also spent time just thinking about maybe there's another business I could acquire. And so I should spend the rest of my time in school figuring out what that other business is, figuring out what it would take to raise money to buy it, or buy something of a small enough scale that I could purchase it. But after this summer of reflection, I've realized Indifferent Broccoli and video game server hosting is what I want to do. So I'm going to dive full force into that as much as I can during the school year, and then 100% after I graduate.
Yeah, that's super
I
exciting.
lucked out. I lucked out in finding something I'm interested in that can make money, that the work is interesting. That's really hard. Like, it was a really stars aligning moment that I was able to find will and 70 2D server hosting after a Google search. And so this summer, as I was exploring other potential paths, I realized the chance that this happens again is not zero, but it's low.
Right. Yeah, I agree. It's great when you can kind of check all those boxes that you mentioned. So very exciting. Congratulations. I think it's great that you've also already got momentum, like it's working, right? So it's not like you are going to be trying to start something from scratch or anything after you graduate. I think it's great to already kind of be rolling on something.
Mm-hmm.
So that's awesome. I have kind of a few that what I would call like more like tactical or nitty gritty
Mm-hmm.
questions that our audience may not love, but something I alluded to is I'm trying to buy a business, or I think I want to. So I'm curious just about some of the mechanics of that. One thing you mentioned in your starter story interview is borrowing against your stock portfolio in order to come up with the funds to acquire 72D server hosting. So I'm curious, I guess number one, like, how'd you figure out that was a thing? So I've heard people mention that on podcasts, but I hadn't really considered it for myself. And number two, like, what is that process like? Was it fairly straightforward?
Yes. So where did that idea came from? It came from one of my professors indirectly during my fall quarter, who mentioned offhand that you can actually borrow at similar rates that banks borrow at by borrowing on margin, which means borrowing with your portfolio as collateral. That had nothing to do with buying a business. That was just an offhand remark that he'd made that stuck with me, that I remembered. And so when this opportunity to buy 72D server hosting came up, this was one tool and source of financing that I could get for the lowest interest rate. And fortunately, the broker I use M1 Finance, makes it very simple to borrow. That's part of like their value proposition is simplicity. So really it was just a click of a button, and then you get money in your account, and then you pay interest on it every month based on how much you have borrowed, and you can repay it at whatever intervals you want. And the only constraint is as long as you have dollars borrowed, you're accruing interest. But there are lots of sources of financing, but there are ways to get creative outside of you have a lot of savings or you need to go to friends and family. So actually the internship I did this summer, and another source of inspiration for buying a business at all, is through something that's fairly popular and was developed at Stanford, and it's called search funds. So a search fund is where typically a recent MBA raises money from investors to fund themselves looking for a small business to buy. And you typically raise money for up to 2 years. And then during those 2 years, if you find a promising target business, and these are typically small, sustainable, boring, like Warren Buffett type businesses, you find this business, you take it back to the investors, you say, hey, this looks good, and they'll give thumbs up or thumbs down. And if they give thumbs up, then they put in the remaining capital to acquire the business, and then you take over as CEO, and you get a percentage of the equity of the business as compensation for doing the search and running the business as CEO. So that's a unusual but interesting path, and that's called search funds.
Got it. And so this summer, I don't know quite the structure, but I assume it's not a company because you're kind of you're creating the company, right? So what was the internship around?
So the internship, I was working for investors that invest in search funds. So part of my day-to-day was talking to these recent MBAs who want to raise money to look for a business, talking to people we'd already funded to get our feedback on the businesses they'd found, and then ultimately making the decision if we want to finance the full acquisition.
Great. Yeah, that's super interesting. I'm curious, not to completely nerd out here, but if you might be able to throw out a few, you mentioned there are ways to get creative. So the top ways to buy a business that would come to mind for me are you have savings, you borrow on margin, like we talked about, SBA loan, seller financing. Those are kind of like the top ones that come to mind. Or what are the other things that I might be missing?
You kind of nailed it. Another way similar to seller financing is called an earnout. So seller financing is you're essentially borrowing from the seller and you have payments you need to make to them over time. An earnout is slightly different in that you only pay them if it hits a certain milestone. So for example, you buy the business for less than the seller was originally happy to sell it for, but in exchange you say, well, but if in a year we've grown revenue by 20%, then you'll get even more. So it's a way of shifting around who bears the risk. You, the seller, bringing on outside investors. It's all about who bears the risk should things go well or not go well. And if you don't have a lot of savings or a lot of capital, then it's maybe harder for you to bear the risk. And in those cases, maybe it's your negotiation skills or just your creativity of finding ways for people with capital to bear the risk.
Great. Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks for taking me through that. It's always like something to think about, right, is risk especially when you're doing something like this. And so kind of on that note, I'm curious what, in your case, things looked like when you were kind of doing your due diligence. And for the audience, the process is kind of, you find a target you want to acquire. Jake mentioned he had a few calls. You sign a letter of intent, which kind of agrees upon a purchase price. You have a time window in order to execute the transaction. And then similar to buying a house, right, you have this period where you can do your due diligence. And so I'm curious what that looked like for you when you were acquiring 72D server hosting.
Mm-hmm. In that final due diligence period, you get access to everything. Like they open up their Stripe account, Google Analytics account, like their database and customer lists. Your main goal during that period is to make sure you're buying what you think you are buying. The day you take over after the transaction's complete, you don't want any surprises. You want to know everything is there in advance. And so it is leading up to that point, it is this dance of you want the seller to trust you enough that you're not snooping around for nefarious purposes. You're actually serious about going through with the transaction. So getting up to that point requires building a strong relationship with the seller. But then during that due diligence period, it's all about making sure you're buying what you think you're buying. Google Analytics, Stripe, seeing the code base, potentially talking to customers, potentially talking to employees. Yeah. But one thing that was unique with this situation with 7D, 2D server hosting and Will is Will also had a YouTube channel where he talked about the process of building 7D, 2D server hosting. And this went back for a year or two. So I knew he wasn't lying right away because I saw having at least a year's worth of material of him going in pretty nitty gritty detail, his process of building the business. That will never happen. That you'll have that kind of insight before you sign anything. And that
Yeah.
that gave me a lot of confidence to go through with this process.
Right. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because I was thinking about surely that adds a lot of credibility to
Hmm.
Will's side. So I guess I'm curious, like, what your feeling was when it came time to transfer to escrow. Because I just think about myself, and I'm kind of in a similar situation. I haven't explained much about, but similar to how you took a leave from business school to do this, I've kind of taken a leave from regular employment to do
Hmm.
something similar. And so for me, like, it would, if something went wrong, it would cut down my runway significantly and maybe have to look at getting a regular job again, et cetera, et cetera. And so when I think about actually getting to that point where you're making that transfer, and of course you've borrowed against your stock portfolio, like, were you confident at that point and pretty at peace, or was there, kind of stomach cramps at that point?
A little bit of both. I mean, it's obviously a big decision. It can impact you in a real way if things don't go well. Um, One thing that gave me confidence was I was not doing something that would get me ahead of over my skis. Like if everything totally failed and I lost the full amount, it would hurt and it would hurt a lot, but I would not be destitute. And I'm going back to business school after a year. So career-wise, there's very little downside. I just get a great story of how I bought a business and drove it into the ground. But
Yeah.
hey, now I'm a Stanford MBA graduate. Um, so having that safe, like diamond encrusted safety net 12 months out gave me a lot of confidence on the non financial side of it, the like psyche side of it. Um, but on the financial side of it, like what I'd say to you is just think through everything that could happen. Like it's sort of the same idea as with due diligence is you want to make sure you're buying what you think you're buying. You don't want surprises on day zero. So like go through the exercise of modeling the different cases. Like what's this look like financially if everything goes well? What's my base case expectation? And then what's the downside look like? What would cause the downside? What could I do if the downside happened? Um, yeah. And when you're buying a business to take it over like this, as opposed to doing like a 0 to 1 VC path, you are buying it because there is a stable, steady income coming from it and stable, steady customers. So really looking at how long have the customers been with this business? How long has this business been around? Is it only 3 months old, but they grew real fast and I'm going to buy it to capture that growth? But oh no, that growth was just a fluke and now it's back to zero. Or, oh, this business has been around for 3 years. They've grown steadily each year and I have customers that have been around for 18 months. It's all about just understanding everything that could play out.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. I think for me, like, not just in business, but personal life as well, I'm always thinking about how to cap the downside. And so I think that advice about kind of modeling the various scenarios. What if it does go to zero? Like, then what happens? Making sure that you wouldn't be
Mm-hmm.
completely wiped out, I think is really wise. So thanks for that. So we're getting close to the end of our time. One thing I did want to touch on, I think might be fun to kind of end with this, is you mentioned in your starter story interview that you can learn business through playing strategy games. So I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about what your thinking is on learning through playing video games. I think is a really interesting take.
Yes. So you can learn so many things through video games. I think video games are something all kids should play, and they'll be way smarter if they do grow up playing video games. But specifically for running a business, strategy games are actually helpful. And specifically, these there's a genre of games called grand strategy games. The one I mentioned before is called Crusader Kings or Crusader Kings 2. And why I say that's like running a business is Crusader Kings is a game where you're like in charge of territory in Europe, and you can grow and expand by conquering neighboring territories. And as you conquer neighboring territories, your income increases. It's like what you'd think about a strategy game. But there's so many elements that are just like real life running a business. One is delegation. So you have like 5 slots where you can have your council, I don't know what it's called, but your council, and you can like send your spy off to a foreign country, and you just forget about the spy, but you know that that spy is doing something every month of the game. You can have this person researching, and so it's just there's so many I have so many ideas about this. It's tough to say it on the spot, but delegation, relationship management. So a big mechanic of the game is you actually have to build relationships with neighboring rulers, and there's an interesting way that the game allows you to do that. But that's like sales in real life. Like after I played that game, I'm like, why doesn't LinkedIn implement this? Like, why don't I have a relationship score with every other person on LinkedIn, and I can see their affinity towards me? Like, it's not just friends and not friends. It's like Peter and I now have a 65 out of 100 score, and then my best friend and I are 99 out of 100, and that person that I like insulted 3 years ago, we're at 12 out of 100.
Yeah.
And that is kind of how it is in real life,
Right.
but it's not made explicit like it is in the game. But using that as a tool to think about things is helpful.
Yeah, I think that's a super interesting take. Yeah, delegation, relationships, like you mentioned, resource allocation, strategy in general. So I kind of missed the video game bust when I was a kid, but that had me thinking like maybe I should pick this up and kind of see what the deal is. So thanks for sharing that. I think that's a super interesting take on things. Well, Jake, this has been great. I want to respect your time, but before we go, I just wanted to give you the opportunity. Anything you want to share with the audience, any advice, anything you want to plug? Obviously, we'll link Indifferent Broccoli in the show notes, but anything that you want to end with in particular?
I'll end with my biggest piece of wisdom that I've like taken to heart over the last year and a half of working on this project is growing a business is simple but not easy, in the same way that working out is simple but not easy. So if I know for a fact that if I lift weights, progressively heavier weights, 3 times a week for the next 18 months, I'll be jacked. I'll be really strong. But that's really hard because it takes a lot of discipline. So and that can be frustrating, is I know what I need to do, but I just can't do it. So really focusing on the discipline aspect of growing a business, which similarly, if I identify problems customers have, build the solution, measure the solution, drop what hurts metrics, keep what helps metrics. If I just regularly do that every week in a disciplined way for 18 months, then I'll progress and I'll grow and the business will improve. And as for businesses that are more like this, not like VC backed, which is maybe a like home run type businesses are slightly different, but for incremental improvement businesses, this is what you need to do. So focusing on the discipline and the meta game of keeping yourself motivated. is a big part of it. And that is just as important as coming up with ideas for what to build, is coming up with ideas for how to keep yourself motivated.
Yeah, I think it's easy to overcomplicate, and I especially do. But yeah, I think the whole goal is to keep going, right? So that makes a lot of sense to me. Well, Jake, thanks so much for coming on the show. Any way that the audience can get in contact with you? Any Twitter, anything that you want to mention?
Yeah, the best way would be join the Indifferent Broccoli Discord. Like that's where I spend a lot of my time. And you can get there either through our website, indifferentbroccoli.com, Google Indifferent Broccoli, Google Indifferent Broccoli Discord. But that's the best way to get in touch.
Great. And we will link all of that in the show notes for those of you who are interested. Jake, thanks again for coming on the show. Thanks so much for listening. A few shameless plugs before you go. Aaron's Code School Parsity is at parsity.io, and Parsity has a new cohort kicking off this fall on October 17th. Parsity also has a free cohort-based JavaScript course, which is called Dev30, and Dev30 has a new cohort kicking off on October 24th. I also just released a course. It's called Junior to Senior, and it's my best knowledge, skills, strategies, and tactics for going from an entry-level junior developer to a senior developer. It's a Udemy course, so it's video-based, and you can just watch and follow along at your own convenience. And for listeners of this podcast, we have a limited number of coupon codes that will get you the course for free. So the link to that is below, and the code is DY100. So be sure to check that out. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.